Welcome, and thank you for joining us. This video is designed to give you a basic overview of the Volunteer Reception Center, or VRC. In this overview, we will present you with the following information about each station at the VRC: the main objectives of the staff, the station-specific documents, and the main steps taken by the staff. We will begin the overview with the general supplies that are located at every station. These include a station binder, station tote, and station vests. The station binder contains station-specific forms and general forms used by all stations. The station tote contains a station binder, station forms, writing utensils, and notepads. The station vests at each station identify the specific staff for that station. Each station binder contains the following: a floor plan and a list of stations the volunteers will visit while at the VRC. Station-specific documents, such as the station script and station-specific forms. And general forms used by all stations. These include the general message form, the incident forms, such as the incident report, complaint report, and incident action log. These forms will be utilized by staff if an incident occurs at the VRC, such as an injury. Let's begin our overview with the first staff position at the VRC, the greeter. The greeter has the following objectives. They serve as the first impression of the VRC, and they greet and direct incoming public and volunteers. To accomplish this task, the greeter utilizes the greeter script. This provides them with some basic bullet point information and statements to assist in their objectives. Next on our overview is the sign-in station. The staff at this station has the following objectives: to assist the volunteers in signing in, to help the volunteers begin their paperwork, and to provide the volunteer with the volunteer folder. To accomplish this, the staff use the following documents: the staff and general public sign-in sheets, the background check authorization and volunteer processing checklist, which are located in the permanent folder, and they will also be providing the volunteer with their volunteer folder, which contains the following: the registration form, volunteer availability form, and the code of conduct and liability waiver. Once the volunteer arrives at sign-in, here are the basic steps that the staff will complete with them. They're going to greet the volunteer, sign them in, and provide them with a name tag, have them fill out the background check and the volunteer processing checklist. Once complete with those forms, they will also be handed their volunteer folder. The staff will then direct them to orientation, part 1. Next on our overview is orientation, part 1. The staff at the station have the following objectives: provide the volunteer with a basic situational awareness briefing, provide them with a basic facility safety briefing, and list the available volunteer opportunities. To accomplish this, they will use the following documents: the orientation part 1 script, and the just-in-time basic safety training attendance log. Here is the basic steps that the staff complete with the volunteers once they arrive. First, they greet the volunteer, then verify that everyone has a name tag, explain the VRC process, provide them with a situational awareness briefing, provide them with a basic facility safety briefing, and then ask if they have any questions. If they have none, they will proceed to the orientation part 2. Next, we have orientation part 2. Staff at the station have only one objective: to assist the volunteer in completing their paperwork. The staff accomplishes this task by utilizing the following documents: the orientation part 2 script, the volunteer registration and experience form, the volunteer availability form, and the volunteer liability and code of conduct. The following are the basic steps that the orientation part 2 staff complete. First, they will greet volunteers. Then they will instruct the volunteers to open their volunteer folder and fill out the registration and availability form. Once they have finished with that, a runner will collect these forms, then instruct the volunteers to fill out but to not sign the code of conduct and liability form. The runner will then direct the volunteer to the registration line when space becomes available. The next position in the overview is the flow/runner staff. The staff for this position have the following objectives. They monitor the flow of the volunteers throughout the VRC, keeping an eye out to make sure that there's no bottlenecks. They run documents to locations in the VRC as necessary, and escort volunteers to and from stations as necessary. The only forms that the staff would complete would be the incident and complaint reports, which we talked about in the beginning. Here are the basic steps that this staff will complete. For the flow staff, which is stationed at Orientation Part 2, they will collect the completed registration forms and transport them to the flow desk as volunteers finish. They will also control the speed at which the volunteers enter the standing line for the registration station. The flow volunteer stationed at the flow desk is in charge of going through the completed registration forms and pairing them with the completed background checks in the permanent folder. When the pairing is complete, they will place the folder in the registration queue. The runner is in charge of maintaining a lookout for stations that need assistance, and assisting the flow and other VRC staff as necessary. Next in our overview is the registration station. The main objectives of the staff are to review the registration form for completeness and to witness the signatures on the liability and the code of conduct forms. To accomplish these objectives, the staff utilizes the following documents: the registration script, the volunteer registration form, the liability and code of conduct form, and the completed background check. The following are the basic steps that the staff complete. First, they will take the manila permanent folder from the queue. Then they will look over the registration form. Once they have familiarized themselves with the form, they will call the volunteer over to the station. They will then verify the registration section of the form with the volunteer using the provided script. Next, they will ask the volunteer if they've had a chance to review the liability and code of conduct form. If so, they will have the volunteer sign and witness the signature. Then they will place both the registration form and the liability form in the manila permanent folder. In the folder, under the volunteer processing checklist, they will circle whether or not they have signed the waiver agreement and whether or not they have signed the application. Once this is all complete, they will send the volunteer onto the interview station. Next on our overview is the interview station. The following are the main objectives of the interview staff: to review the skills and experience section with the volunteer and to suggest a potential opportunity for the volunteer to be assigned, which is this with the following documents: the interview script, the volunteer registration and skills and experience form, and the volunteer availability form. The staff uses the following steps to accomplish these tasks. First, they greet the volunteer. Then they review the skills and experience section with the volunteer and try to extract more information about skills related to opportunities available. Then they suggest a potential opportunity based on the interview. Then thank the volunteer and send them into the assignment desk. Next in our overview is the assignment station. The main objectives of the assignment station include using the suggestion from the interview station staff to match the volunteer with an appropriate opportunity, and assigning the volunteer to that opportunity. To accomplish these objectives, the staff utilizes the following forms: the volunteer registration and skills and experience form, the volunteer availability form, the volunteer assignment card, the volunteer assignment briefing form, and the volunteer processing checklist. To accomplish these objectives, the staff utilizes the following steps. First, they greet the volunteer. Next, they use the suggestion from the interview staff to assign the volunteer to an opportunity. Then they verify the assignment opportunity with the volunteer, making sure that they are willing to do the assignment. With the volunteer, they will then fill out the remaining sections on the volunteer assignment card, provide them with basic information about the opportunity, place the assignment on the volunteer processing checklist, show the volunteer their blank calendar in the folder so that they can track their own hours, ask the volunteer if they have any questions, and then thank them and send them on to the next station. The next station on our overview is credentialing. The main objectives of the credentialing staff are to provide all volunteers with a background and licensure check, and to provide all volunteers with identical incident badging. The staff accomplishes these objectives utilizing the following documents: the volunteer processing checklist, the background check form, and the volunteer badge log. The following are the steps that the staff uses to accomplish these objectives. While the volunteer is working their way through the earlier stations, the following is happening in the background at the credentialing station. Using the information provided in the background check authorization, the staff will run the volunteer's background check. The staff then uses applicable systems to run licensure checks. Once the background check is complete, they will mark so on the volunteer processing checklist. If there are any issues with the background check or any of the other licenses, the staff will place a blue sticker on the front of the permanent folder. Now we will go through the steps for badging at the credentialing desk. First, they will greet the volunteer, then using information from the volunteer permanent folder, they will write the following on the volunteer's wristband: the volunteer's name, ID number, and date. They will place the wristband on the volunteer, and then the station may or may not take a picture for an ID card depending on the incident. Next, they will thank the volunteer and send them on to the training station. If they are doing an ID card, that will then be transferred to the support desk later by a runner. The next station on our overview is training. The objective of the training staff is to brief all volunteers on the following: the code of conduct, personal health and safety, psychological first aid, the incident command system, volunteer assignment card, and demobilization. The staff utilizes the following documents to accomplish these objectives: the training script, the just-in-time basic safety training attendance log, the volunteer processing checklist, and the volunteer assignment card. The staff uses the following steps to train volunteers. First, they greet the volunteer, and then make sure all volunteers have signed in on the training log. Once they receive the permanent folder from the credentialing desk, one staff member will fill out the training section on the volunteer processing checklist, while the other staff member will start the training. They will explain the training process using the training script. You may also utilize a training video instead if one is available. Once the training is complete, they will ask if there are any questions, thank the volunteers, and then direct them to the support station. The next station on our overview is support. The staff at the station have the following objectives: to provide the necessary deployment items to the volunteers, to track all volunteers and keep a log of all assignments that are open, assist the volunteer that may be having a deployment issue, and they do this by using the following documents: the volunteer deployment checklist, the volunteer equipment issue and return form, and the volunteer processing checklist. The staff utilize the following steps to achieve these objectives. For deployment, they first greet the volunteer, then review the deployment checklist with the volunteer. They issue the volunteer necessary deployment items, coordinate transportation if necessary to the job site, provide the volunteer with supervisor's information if it's known, and remind the volunteer that for any life safety issues they should call 911 and notify their supervisor and the VRC. For volunteer tracking, they will log the volunteer information on the volunteer tracking form, place a popsicle stick with the volunteer's name, ID number, and phone number on the volunteer deployment tracking board, instruct the volunteer to sign out at the sign-out desk, and then send the volunteer's manila folder to the data management station. For volunteer issues, they will handle incoming volunteer calls from deployed volunteers, and then log any complaints and concerns using the complaint report, incident log, and the incident action log as necessary. The next station on our overview is demobilization. At this station, the staff have the following objectives: to debrief the volunteers on their experience, provide psychological first aid to volunteers and refer volunteers to disaster behavioral health as needed, and to document the return of all equipment and out-process the volunteers. To achieve these objectives, the staff utilize the following forms: the volunteer equipment issue and return form and the ICS 211 demobilization form. The following are the steps used by the staff to accomplish these objectives. They greet the volunteer, provide a basic debriefing and basic psychological first aid, collect any returned deployment items, and fill out the ICS 221 with the volunteer. After that, they allow the volunteer an opportunity to provide some feedback, and then send the volunteer onto the retention station. The next station on our overview is data management. The staff at the station is responsible for the following: to compile volunteer information and ensure operational period forms are sent to the appropriate sections. They achieve this objective by using the following forms: the Volunteer Registration and Skills and Experience Form, the External Agency Volunteer Request Form, the ICS 213 General Message and Request for Resources Form, the Finance Tracking Form, the ICS 211 Sign-In Forms, and the Volunteer Processing Checklist. The following are the steps used by the data management staff. First, they collect the Manila permanent folder from the outbox. Then they enter the volunteer data into a database or spreadsheet, record and report the volunteer referrals each operational period, and send that information to the appropriate staff. The next station on our overview is the phone bank and call center. The main objectives of this station include taking calls from the public and directing as necessary, taking calls for volunteer requests from external agencies, and taking calls from deployed volunteers. The documents used to achieve these objectives are the intake script for public calls, the intake script for volunteer agency requests, the external volunteer agency request form, and the volunteer assignment card. The following are steps used to accomplish these tasks. For public calls, they will utilize a script for possible volunteers. They will also make themselves aware of any phone numbers and locations for donated items that they can help refer the public to. For external volunteer requests from other agencies, they should have a list of currently participating agencies and use the external agency volunteer request form to complete the request. They will record these requests for volunteers on the volunteer request form, and then partially fill out a volunteer assignment card and have a runner place it on the volunteer request board. For deployed volunteers, they will assist the volunteer as necessary and record calls in the appropriate log. The final position in our overview is facilities. The objectives of this position are as follows. They are there to assure the building is safe and ready for a VRC setup. The documents used by the staff are the Facility Assessment Checklist, the Volunteer Reception Center Security Plan, the VRC ICS positions, the ICS 203 Organizational Assignment List, the Supply List, and the Communications Resource List. The steps to accomplish these objectives are coordinating the opening of the facility, filling out the necessary paperwork, and managing logistics for supplies. Now that we have covered the positions, I want to briefly talk about the retention desk. This desk is located at the exit of the VRC, and it is designed to capture volunteers that wish to volunteer with us again. This could either be by capturing them as an affiliated volunteer with an agency, or by capturing them for future opportunities in a database. The easiest way to fill this position is to allow affiliated agencies such as the Red Cross, United Way, or Salvation Army to supply their own volunteers that will sit at this desk and recruit volunteers that go through. Or, alternatively, you can place pamphlets of information on the desk and allow volunteers to peruse on their way out, allowing them to follow up with these agencies on their own. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate you taking the time to work with us. For more information about this plan, you can contact the Region 1 Volunteer Support Work Group through the District 1 Regional Medical Response Coalition. Thank you for joining us.